Hello everyone, today we have a lot to cover. We are going to start out by briefly reviewing the differences between clauses and phrases, and then we will differentiate between simple and compound sentences, following which we will address run-on sentences. So here we go. First off, a clause is a group of words that has a subject and a verb. A phrase is just a group of words without a subject and a verb. Now you'll remember that there are two types of clauses that you need to know about. The first is an independent clause. That can be a sentence by itself. And then the second is a dependent clause, which cannot be a sentence by itself. Here are some examples of those. First off, the man went to the store to buy bread and milk. That is a complete thought. It makes sense on its own, so it is an independent clause. The next one, although he went to the store, does not make sense by itself. It is not a complete thought, therefore it is a dependent clause. Now, a simple sentence is really pretty simple. A simple sentence is just any sentence that contains one independent clause. Here are a couple of examples. He walked to the car. We have a subject, we have a verb, we have a complete thought, therefore it is a sentence. It is just one independent clause. That works. Next example. She completed the test. She is our subject, completed is our verb. It makes sense on its own, therefore it is a complete thought. Therefore, that is a simple sentence. Simple sentences are simple. They just have one independent clause. Compound sentences, on the other hand, are not quite as simple. There's a little bit more to them. Compound sentences are sentences that have more than one independent clause. Here's an example. The school board voted to change the school's boundaries. All of that I just read is an independent clause. But then the sentence continues. It says, but the community overturned the decision with an appeal. That second half, the community overturned the decision with an appeal, that is also an independent clause. So with compound sentences, what we have is two independent clauses that are joined together either with a comma and a coordinating conjunction or with a semicolon. And we're going to look at those differences. First off, the first way that you can combine independent clauses correctly is you can use a comma and a coordinating conjunction. The second way is that you can put a semicolon between the two independent clauses. And if you use a semicolon, you no longer need a coordinating conjunction. Let's look at some of the specific differences here. First off, our top example uses a comma and a coordinating conjunction to combine two independent clauses. The school board voted to change the school's boundaries. That is independent clause number one. But the community overturned the decision with an appeal. The community overturned the decision with an appeal is independent clause number two. And you can see our highlighted part right there. We have a comma and a but. But is a coordinating conjunction. We're going to look at some other coordinating conjunctions in just a moment, but what you can see here is that we have a comma and a coordinating conjunction combining the two independent clauses. Our next example on the bottom says the school board voted to change the school's boundaries, independent clause number one. The community overturned the decision with an appeal, independent clause number two, and between those we have a semicolon. Now semicolons are kind of like periods, but what they do is they take two independent clauses, so two clauses that could stand on their own, and we say these are really similar, they're really closely related, therefore we don't want to put them in two separate sentences. We're going to tie them together with a semicolon, and that shows our readers that we have two complete thoughts that are closely related. Now, in order to be able to do this well, you need to know what all of the coordinating conjunctions are, because you'll remember that one of the ways to form a compound sentence is with a comma and a coordinating conjunction. Here are the coordinating conjunctions that we have in English, and an easy acronym to remember all of them is fanboys. F stands for for, A stands for and, N stands for nor, B stands for but, O stands for or, Y stands for yet, and S stands for so. All of these are the words we can use, in addition to a comma, to combine independent clauses. So this is a very important slide for you. This lists all of your coordinating conjunctions. These are your options when you are combining independent clauses using a comma. Now, this all segues into the idea of a run-on sentence. And all a run-on sentence is it is just a compound sentence that has not been punctuated correctly. In other words, it is two independent clauses or more that have been smashed together without using a comma and a coordinating conjunction or without using a semicolon. Here's an example of that. The school board voted to change the school's boundaries. The community overturned the decision with an appeal. Now, you'll remember based on what we just talked about that in order to combine these two independent clauses, we would either need to use a comma and a coordinating conjunction, or we would need a semicolon. This sentence only has a comma. Therefore, this is a run-on sentence. Additionally, that comma in the middle happens to be a comma splice, which is when you try combining two independent clauses with only a comma and not a coordinating conjunction. So it's kind of two problems at once. What we're focusing on here, though, is the fact that it is a run-on sentence. It's two independent clauses that have been smashed together without the proper punctuation. Now, a common myth with run-on sentences is that a run-on sentence is simply a sentence that is too long. That is not correct. Sometimes that's true, but that's not really the rule. Sentences can be as long as they need to be, and run-on sentences can be any length. The only rule that we need to remember for run-on sentences is they are simply two independent clauses that have not been punctuated correctly. Now, here are some examples. At the top, we have a run-on. He went to the store, comma, he bought milk. He went to the store is an independent clause. He bought milk is also an independent clause, but we have not punctuated them correctly. Therefore, that is a run-on. Notice how short that sentence is. So you can see here that just because it's a run-on doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to be long. Additionally, you can see our bottom example, that is not a run-on, and that is much longer than the run-on that we see at the top. Let's read that one together. After evading the police during a long, intense, and meandering chase, the thieves eventually returned home, semicolon. Once they did, they began to divide their spoils evenly throughout the group. Now, this sentence starts with a dependent clause after evading the police during a long, intense, and meandering chase. Then we have an independent clause, the thieves eventually returned home. And then we have another independent clause. Once they did, they begin to divide their spoils evenly throughout the group. Now, our independent clauses here have been joined correctly with semicolons, and coincidentally, our dependent clauses have been joined correctly with commas. Therefore, we do not have a run-on sentence. Everything is punctuated correctly. So even though it's a long sentence, that doesn't make it a run-on. Now, what we've talked about today is, first off, we've reviewed clauses and phrases. Then we talked about what differentiates a simple sentence from a compound sentence. And then we talked about run-on sentences. And the thing you need to remember is that when you have two independent clauses and you are joining them together, you can either do that with a comma and a coordinating conjunction. And if you can't remember the coordinating conjunctions, go back into this video where we looked at the slide that had all of them. Or the other way you can combine those independent clauses is with a semicolon. Thank you so much for watching today.